Well, I think most people just think I'm this huge Donald Trump fan. And yeah, we can get into that as we have many times here in the past few weeks. I think he's done some good things and some bad things. But in the end, actually, I'm more of a monarchist. Certainly more of a small government guy. I'm kind of a fan of feudalism. The idea of very small, kind of mini governments governed overall by a Catholic monarch. And of course, we don't have that now. We have very huge governments that federalize and make big decisions for people that are very far away from those making those decisions, which I think is very silly and a pretty dumb form of government. So in the end, I don't even like democracy. I don't even like how our entire system, our form of government works. So when I say I like what Donald Trump is doing, it just means that literally I like some of the things he is doing, not even that I like him himself or the way we govern in general. But I found this on Twitter, pretty interesting top um, thread on this topic as I try to share the screen. This is from Thinking West on Twitter or X. And he starts by saying, "You're a medieval peasant farmer. You're at the bottom rung of society, bound to the land with limited social mobility. But life isn't all that bad. Here's what it looks like. Even compared to the glorified Roman Empire, the average quote unquote dark age peasant likely saw lower taxes, more freedom, and a weaker ruling class under the manorial system, a type of feudalism where peasants worked the land under a lord. In this system, the manor was the epicenter of rural life, often surrounded by several hundred acres, hovels, a church, and community grain mill. The lord of the manor was usually a bishop or abbot of the local church or a wealthy noble. The manor system was community oriented. Farms were concerned with self sufficiency rather than outside trade. This, on the heels of the Roman Empire's high taxes, imperial trade, and military oversight, suggests a freer, more locally minded early medieval society. Look how happy they look. Manor lands could be split up a number of ways: land managed directly for the lord's household, land for serfs that paid in labor, harvests, or cash, and free peasant land, which required only rent. They typically used open field systems with no barriers between neighboring farmers' plots. A peasant laborer would farm a dozen or so narrow strips of arable land. Ridges and furrows were intensively plowed for removing weeds, adding drainage, and preparing the next planting. As you see, it's just an amazing picture, I think. Think of that coming from the medieval ages. Crazy. To accomplish all this plowing, oxen and horses served as medieval tractors. In fact, if you wander among the British countryside today, you can still find these furrows and ridges in memorial to the great labors of the medieval peasant and his beasts of burden. Other animals were kept for meat, dairy, and wool. Cattle, sheep, and goats were grazed on common fields. Chickens likely roamed the village. The manor forest was used for raising pigs and gathering lumber and firewood for the long winters. About 12 acres of land were needed to support a large family. Peasants mostly grew rye, wheat, barley, and oats in northern Europe. Peas, beans, and fruits were secondary. Even with virtually no understanding of soil, nutrients, or microfauna, medieval farmers still knew the importance of crop rotation and letting farmland rest fallow. Many practices used a three field rotation of communally planned fields. Still, yields were low compared to modern farms. One theory for the low yields was a shortage of animal dung, nature's best fertilizer, due to few grazing livestock and pasture to support them. Because farmers were at the whim of the four seasons, only so much farm work could be done in a year. Winter was a time for rest. The church mandated holy days, not only for religious observance, but also to appease revolting populations. Sunday was always a day of rest and mass, and the peasant could expect time off for births, weddings, and whenever traveling entertainment came through. Scholars estimate the number of days off varied from 50 to 150 days a year. Surprising, right? While peasants were the bottom of medieval society, they enjoyed several rights, lived under protection from knights and lords, and worked less than you probably do. So, how does your life compare to that of a medieval peasant? And I think obviously, this is simplified, it's shortened. There was a lot that went on. It was not all roses. It was also a hard life, of course. And you had plenty of times there were famine and the plague and raids by Viking warriors. So there were obviously hard times too, and very different struggles than we go through today, which he doesn't really bring up. But the idea of the system and how they worked, and I think that that's something that I really believe, and I've said many times that I think God made us much more to be farmers than to be podcasters, right? To be people who are sitting at computers or looking at screens. We were meant to be outside. And really one of my favorite jobs I've had this far in my life. I worked for a year or 6 months, I guess, at a golf course. And it was very hard work. And I certainly wasn't always happy, but just that being outside all the time, working in the grass and the fields and the dirt, rain and sun, it was really an experience. And it was something that really was fulfilling, even though it was just a golf course, but it was really pretty amazing. I can see if you add all of that to actually growing and sustaining yourself, I think that is much more of what we are meant to be and meant to do. Now, I also think that the idea of local governance makes so much more sense. I mean, just imagine if you had a local lord who has at most, a couple hundred people who he's really in charge of. He is their lord. Like he is going to make all the decisions. He's going to be judge and jury in a lot of cases. Now, obviously that can be a bad thing because if your, lord is a bad guy and, goes around killing people, then yeah, that's bad. So again, I'm not saying this is perfect, but the idea of localized government just makes it so that it would be so much more fair, or should be. It's being governed by someone who's there, who actually sees these people and they see him. So if he becomes a terrible lord, they might rise up and kill him, which happened many times. And I think that was, it just made it so that there was something you could do. And it's part of why people these days are so, I don't know, lazy or so what's the word? They ambivalent. They just don't care. It's like, well, okay, whatever, yeah, world's ending and our taxes are crazy and we barely have enough to live on, but who are we gonna lynch? Again, I'm not saying lynching is good, but I mean, who are we gonna go after with a pitchfork, right? And since they don't have that because the people in charge are in Washington, DC, or in my case in Berlin or Karlsruhe, or wherever it is, that makes it so that there's no one you can immediately, you know, even consider going to. Some people will. So every now and then you'll get someone who'll, picket line around a politician's house. Usually they're your greenies because they're typically your more fervent political champions. Also crazy. But that idea again of a smaller government, it just makes so much more sense. I think we're so obsessed these days with our system being the best, even though we always are also convinced that our times are the worst. And it's like, well, I mean, okay, which is it? If our times are the worst, is it maybe because of how we are governed? Is it maybe because of the internet? I know, again, I get it. I'm being hypocritical. I'm publishing on the internet, but it's worth a thought, right? Is it because of Amazon? Is it because we can order anything we want rather than supporting our neighbor down the street? Is it because we can eat Rice Krispie treats that are produced in China and we're eating them wrapped up in plastic packaging? So pretty much poison wrapped in poison, and we're going to eat them for breakfast. These are things that they weren't the case back in the day, and that's the question. Now we live longer, but do we live better? Do we? I mean, I live here in Germany. I have 36 days of vacation. I know many people in the US have 14 or 10. It's crazy. Back in the days, like they said, 51 days, 50 days, like minimum. So if you're working really hard in the fields, yeah, that's hard, but it's satisfying, it's fulfilling. And then, you're going to have the next few days off, and you're going to have the holidays, the holy days. You're going to have the community. You're going to help. They're going to help you. I guess, it's crying over spilled milk. the world is what it is, but it's an interesting thought, right? Because I think again, it's just so interesting how the history books write these as the dark ages while we are the enlightened ages. I mean, that's literally what they think. Really? Is that really the case? Do you think? Is our time enlightened? You could fool me.